As the totalitarian juggernaut rolls on, finally announcing the rollout of the much denied, but nevertheless much anticipated, and it must be said, much feared digital ID, it is again tempting to think that the regime has all the cards and that the ball is very much in their court. As we all know, the long march through the institutions is now complete, and all of the organs of the state, as well as the fourth estate of the media, as well as complicit corporations that seek to benefit from the digital ID rollout, march along with them. It's tempting to think that they have all the control. It's tempting to think that as they continue to be more draconian and seemingly more confident in their efforts to censor us and punish us when we refuse to be censored, that they really are cementing their control with every passing day. It's tempting to think that, as they close every avenue of escape from their plans, be it financial, biological, nutritional, cultural, and especially spiritual, that there is nothing that can be done to stop them. It's tempting to think that way, and it is, as usual, completely and utterly wrong. Yes, the chief globalist puppet is in 10 Downing Street, along with an ambitious but scarcely numerate office girl in number 11. Yes, a lifelong anti-British Marxist is Foreign Secretary, whilst an actual ethnically Pakistani Islamist charged with the task of reducing Islamist immigration, much of it from Pakistan, sits at the head of the Home Office. Yes, the Defence Secretary is doing a sterling job of defending the borders of Ukraine, whilst at the same time is doing precisely nothing to defend the borders of the United Kingdom. Yes, we have an Energy Secretary whose actions will ensure that any remaining British industry will have to shut up shop, as they can't afford even to keep the lights on. Yes, we have a terrorist defending lawyer as the mayor of our capital city, who believes that the largest ethnic group in London, which remains the white British, is not representative of Londoners, and who is bankrolled by the leftist American billionaire Michael Bloomberg to pursue policies that aim to reduce that white British demographic even further, to ensure that they become not even the largest minority, but merely one of several competing minorities. Yes, we have a fourth estate, the traditional media, which propagandizes the British population to believe that everything about their country, their society, their nation, and even their very character is racist, imperialist, colonialist, and bigoted beyond redemption, and that their only chance of becoming in any way morally acceptable to world opinion is by way of constant and unstinting grovelling and apology to what is, we must remember, the overwhelming global majority. Along with nation destroying levels of reparations, of course. That, of course, goes without saying. Yes, we have a monarch, a king, a head of state, head of the Church of England, whose role, though mostly symbolic, constantly gives succour to an aggressive foreign and absolutist conquering ideology, emboldening them further, whilst it is his solemn duty, perhaps his only real task, is to defend the domestic faith. It may not even be a stretch to suggest that he may already be a secret Islamic convert. And yes, the proponents of that self-same ideology continue to rape their way through the nation's children, whilst those charged with protecting those children instead focus all their energies on attempting to prevent that fact from becoming known, minimising it, and then making excuses for it when they fail. So yes, there is much against us. That cannot be denied. And similarly, it is also hard to deny that what we are facing is an order of magnitude more serious than any that Britain has faced, at least since the Black Death 670 years ago. Even the world wars will prove to be a little local difficulty by comparison. But, and there's always a but this but is real, although you may not see it at first. And it's this. You see, even with all of the above, even with all of that, even with government, the law, the police, the media, the schools and the universities, local government, celebrities, sports, International bodies like the UN, the EU, the WEF, the G7, the Commonwealth, many, many mostly foreign billionaires like Bill Gates, George Soros, the aforementioned Michael Bloomberg, the dickless Dale Vince, and the cancer in human form of Tony Blair, they're still not winning the argument. They're in charge of everything. They're even in charge of supposedly forming our opinions. And still it's not enough. Still it's not convincing us. And they're spending billions to get us to support them and to turn against those few that oppose them. Trump, Musk, RFK Jr., Orban, Maloney, Farage, Le Pen, Alice Weidel, Geert Wilders, Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib, and perhaps the most maligned man on earth, Tommy Robinson. And Tommy is perhaps the perfect case in point. For perhaps 2 decades, every sinew of the British state has been laser focused on the destruction of his reputation. And they almost did it. It worked on me for many years. I too thought he was a disgusting, hate-filled, racist prick. But somehow, at an embarrassingly late stage, something activated my hitherto dormant critical thinking abilities, and I said to myself, is he racist? Everybody says he is. Perhaps it might be an idea if I found out for myself. And so I went looking, and I couldn't find anything. And so I looked a bit more. Still nothing. And in that looking, I inadvertently became exposed to what he was actually saying. And then, horror of horrors, I started agreeing with him. But even though they are in charge of everything, I'm reminded of that critique that the former Chancellor Norman Lamont made of the final stages of John Major's tenure, that he was in office but not in power. They occupy Downing Street, have a supermajority in Parliament, and sit at the heads of almost every institution there is. But it makes no difference. They're in office, but their power is illusory. And the reason? They in effect have no enforcement. Sure, they arrested 12,000 people last year for online comments, and after the Southport fracas, they arrested, fast-tracked and jailed many hundreds in what amounted to no more than politicised kangaroo show trials. Poor Peter Lynch, suddenly thrust into the hell of Muslim-dominated prisons for the crime of shouting at the police, hardly unpredictably see a way out except by his own hand. Along with the forgotten Kevin Crehan of some years before, who suffered a similar fate, Lynch and Crehan were the first soldiers to fall. Lucy Connolly, a completely ordinary woman with completely ordinary views and complaints, served well over a year for what amounted to an intemperate post. Wayne O'Rourke remains incarcerated for nothing more serious. So why are they doing this? And doesn't the above demonstrate that they hold all the power? Doesn't it prove that? No, it doesn't. It in fact proves the opposite. What it proves is that they are desperate. Like all tyrants, they get more vicious the more they sense their grip on power is slipping. The Southport show trials were to send a message. The message being, we're in charge, and we can weaponise the power of the state to imprison you for noticing what you are noticing. And this is something that you cannot do. Only we can. And for a while they were right. But they thought the show trials would put a lid on it. And in the moment they did. And if you were anything like me, I was shocked that one of the oldest free societies on earth could turn into a totalitarian tyranny overnight. That was shocking, but I knew it wouldn't last. I knew it was just a lull. Even the essentially everyday and ultra-normal Lucy Connolly absorbed what she would never have imagined she would be faced with, took it on the chin, and came out fighting and unrepentant. And she was a normal, middle-class, middle-aged housewife and mother. She wasn't a warrior, but she was made one. One would think that having endured an ordeal such as that, She would have emerged cowed and broken and would have returned to her family and resolved never to enter the conversation again. Nobody would have blamed her, but she didn't and has remained vocal. So their policy is simple, and it's simple because they have nothing else. Fear. Let people know that if the state targets you, they can throw you in a dungeon in a heartbeat. But people are realising that they can't do that to everyone, and they can't do it to most of us. And if we look at some figures, we know that it is impossible to do that to anything other than a vanishingly tiny number of people. They relied upon a small, although it seemed bigger at the time, a small number of cases to shut the rest of us up for fear of what would happen to us. But let's have a cursory look at some numbers. There are, at a maximum, 170,000 police officers in the UK, which includes not only England and Wales, which are often counted together, but also Scotland and Northern Ireland. Even allowing for the official and probably conservatively low estimates on the British population, we have a figure in the region of 70 million people. That's well over 400 people to each police officer, bearing in mind that probably only 2/3 of those are frontline officers rather than admin staff, and that again only 2/3 are male. Assuming some overlap between these two figures, we can probably guess that only 60% of the full total are men in frontline service. So we come to a figure of perhaps 100,000, which gives us an active enforcement civilian to officer ratio of around 700 to 1. For those who say that women are just as effective in frontline roles, I would direct your attention to last year's Manchester airport case, where one male demonstrably overpowered at least 2 female officers before the male officers were able to subdue the assailant and his confederate. Now, in a fully functional, high-trust society, 170,000 police officers are probably enough. In a rapidly degrading, low-trust, authoritarian, sectarian one, it's not enough. It's nowhere near enough. Before the Berlin Wall came down in November 1989, the East German security services, the much feared Stasi, had 91,000 full-time employees in a population of 16.4 million, a ratio of 1 officer to 180 citizens, which is 2 to 4 times the number in the UK, proportionally speaking, depending on how we're measuring it. When we factor in the number of Stasi informants, the COVID snitches of their day, the ratio drops to 1 in every 63 citizens. But if we flog this horse a little more, there were another 90,000 regular, as in non-Stasi police officers, which gives us around 181,000. Plus they were augmented by another 177,000 auxiliaries and volunteers, which cranks the total up to around 350,000 members of the security services, policing a population of 16.4 million people. This new ratio works out at 47 to 1. 47 security personnel for every citizen. So in order to enforce the kind of security state that the regime appears to want, they would need to increase their numbers by at least a factor of 10. Probably not more, as the technology of surveillance has advanced by leaps and bounds since 1989. Therefore, if we approximate the numbers to round figures, the state needs to increase its security personnel by in the region of 1.5 million people. This is obviously not feasible, even if it were affordable, which it isn't. But the point I'm making is that the state's power, even when bad actors hold almost every office, is an illusion. It's a fantasy that only becomes real if we believe in it. And at present, there still are just about enough people who do believe. Not nearly as many as there used to be, and that number is falling with every passing day. And as the image of the all-powerful state becomes revealed for the mirage that it is, the regime is left with only one course of action, which is to leverage the remaining vestiges of the force that it has. George Orwell wrote, "All tyrannies rule with a mixture of fraud and force, but when the fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force." That's where we are now. The weaker the regime, the more spiteful, the more vindictive, and the more vicious it will get. Kevin Crehan, Peter Lynch, Lucy Connolly, and Wayne O'Rourke were the first casualties, but they won't be the last, and they were effective nobodies. The more prominent will enter the crosshairs as the state gets more desperate. The persecution of Tommy will continue unabated, but those who have been thrown to the walls of the state bootlickers, like the media and outfits like Hope Not Hate, such as Lawrence Fox, Katie Hopkins, and Russell Brand, to savage their reputations, their targeting will move up a notch in an attempt to send the message that if these high-profile types can be brought down, they won't think twice about doing the same to us. But the edifice is crumbling. The black-pilled will cravenly insist that we are doomed and that the state's visible power is real. But that's because they are too cowardly to hope and would prefer to be right rather than to win. Too cowardly because for them, the most frightening thing is to have their hopes dashed. But hope is not about woolly, wishful thinking. Hope is not only crucial, it's a necessary prerequisite for victory. We can't win without it. So we must keep our eyes on the prize, whilst at the same time keeping out of the regime's focus. No overt calls to violence or pogroms and no demonisation of ethnic groups, but this is absolutely not the time to stop speaking out. Every rally, every demonstration, every YouTube video, every post and every conversation in the real world is adding to the pressure. It's working. You can see it's working. Their stances on many things are softening as it becomes obvious, even to them, that once they lose control, there'll be no stopping what they've sown. But that doesn't mean that they won't lash out in desperation and jail another housewife, another grandfather, or another teenager. So keep speaking out, but stay safe, stay careful, and above all, stay free.